Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Forouzan, and welcome to the second episode of the Schmoozin with Forouzan podcast. Wanted to do a quick video introduction for this one, and I figured since everyone's cooped up indoors, I'd do it outdoors. Anyways, this is a special episode. We actually spent the first 30 minutes of it discussing psychology. We don't even get to the law till the second half, and I think there's good reason for that. My guest today is a gentleman who left his home country at the age of 8, and he left his country by himself, made his way to the United States, got his law license here, began to establish himself working out of a coffee shop, and in a certain 2, 3 year period ends up hitting over $100 million in settlements. I just think it's such a wonderful story. It's such an inspiring story. And I think the mentality, the psychology, the mindset of these individuals is just as important as knowing the nitty gritty elements of the law. And that's why we took the time to talk about how he has this perseverance that he has. I can tell you, just being the person who listened and asked the questions, I was inspired. And I sincerely hope that you guys listening at home feel the same way. So, without further ado, here is episode number 2.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second episode of the Schmoozin with Forouzan podcast. My name is Daniel Forouzan, and it is my pleasure here to have yet another guest that I've been waiting to speak to for weeks, to be honest with you. Before I get started, I thought I'd tell everyone just a little bit about the guest that we have today, Mr. Abbas Kazerounian. I was referred to Abbas by another attorney. He said, "You need to speak to this guy. He has a crazy story. No one's going to believe it." And I said, "Sure." We got him signed up. And since then, I'm not making this up, 4 other attorneys have come to me independently and told me that I need to speak with Abbas. So clearly we're all in for a treat, and I'm really excited. Mr. Kazerounian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Love the name of the show. And I didn't even know I know 4 people. So that's amazing.
All attorneys, they love you. Everyone keeps speaking so highly of you. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but it's this story about how you started litigating at Starbucks.
Well, I think that's actually misinformation. It was Seattle's best.
Oh, okay. Close enough. Close. You know, what I usually don't like to spend too much time in the, what's your background? What's this? What's that?
Sure.
People like to hear, just to get to the meat of it, people like to hear other things. But in your particular case, it sounds like you have a very interesting background. I'm seeing a Middle Eastern name. I'm hearing an English accent, and you're living and litigating in the United States. Why don't you tell us how all of this happened?
How far back do you want me to go? Were we talking childhood? Are we talking about how I came over here? Or like, tell me because I could literally take up 5 hours right here.
I believe it. So I'm going to assume, did you leave Iran during the turmoil in the 70s? Is that what took you to the UK?
Well, I was born at the end of the 70s, right on the year before the revolution happened. I was born in 78, and I left 7 years after that. And it's kind of a crazy story in itself, because I was meant to leave with my mother and go to Turkey to get a visa to go to the England. And lo and behold, at the airport, my mother wasn't allowed to leave the country. So kind of my dad made this crazy decision that I should leave by myself. And so he gave me his worldly possessions, it was $1,701 US, put it in my hand, and off I went. And so I left 2 weeks before my 8th birthday. And I was living in Istanbul for almost 4 months, trying to work a couple jobs, apply for a visa. And by some miracle, I made it to England, thinking that that's going to be my problems are over. But then the first part of my life in England, where it was actually quite horrendous as well. And actually, I wrote 2 books about that journey. And I'm very lucky because they're both on the curriculum in Australia, New Zealand, and certain states in America, but predominantly New Zealand and Australia. I go to the number 1 in the bestseller list every August, because they have to read me in September for in all the schools. So it's a kind of a crazy story, and that's how I got to England initially.
So I heard you say this, and I'm not sure my brain is working correctly. Did you say at 8 you left? At age of by yourself?
I did, yeah.
What must that have been like?
That was nuts. I was meant to be picked up by somebody who actually did meet me at the airport, but then abandoned me at the airport. And, when you're little, everything is moving much quicker and it seems so much bigger than it actually is when you're an adult. And, it's kind of like, a lot of people go, I don't know how you did it. And I don't know how I did it. Now that I reflect back on it, it seems kind of daunting, but I think you go into survival mode, and I don't think as human beings, we know quite what we're capable of unless you have to. Because I remember starting to cry and I realized I had no one to cry to. And I remember writing this in the book. And you very quickly thinking, well, if I get found out, they're either going to send me back and I'm going to be a big disappointment to my father, or which was a major concern for me at that time. Or I'm just going to have to kind of rough it out. And, it's an extraordinary story. But what I think a lot of people miss in that story is the kindness of so many strangers along that journey. But for those individuals and strangers willing to help a complete stranger to them, I would not be where I am today. And I think, the moral of the story is, I believe in the goodness of human beings, because we hear the headlines are always about bad and evil and, murder and things like that. But I think there's more goodness than there is evil. And that's what really epitomized my journey into being able, I had a lot of luck, I had a lot of tenacity, and I did a lot of things that were crazy, right? I'm not trying to I'm not in no way trying to undermine the story, but what I am telling you is what is one of the most key factors in that story is the kindness of strangers.
Interesting. Okay. So I know this is supposed to be a professional podcast. We'll get to the legal stuff. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, he has all the accolades that you need to have. But I right now am most interested in this story. And, we'll see where it goes. But so this is wild to me. So age 8, you're in Iran, you leave Iran, you go to Turkey, you're supposed to meet someone, they end up abandoning you. You're 8 years old. How do you, and I assume you went, I haven't quite confirmed, but I assume you went to the United Kingdom from there?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
How did you manage this?
So I was going to the embassy. Well, that's actually the consulate in Istanbul, because the embassy is in Ankara. But you can apply at that consulate because it's a big consulate. Mm-hmm. And I would go there and I would try and find somebody to interpret, because you have to understand it. At that time in the early to mid 80s, there were about 1 million Iranians that were living in Istanbul, because it was one of the few countries Iranian citizens could go to without a visa. And that's where they would go to try and apply for visas, to go to the West. And I would usually try and find somebody that would speak Farsi and interpret. And I remember very, very distinctly my first visit to the consulate. They thought that this was a hoax. And they said, well, they sent me away with a laundry list of documents that I need to go back with in order to try and verify my story. And a large portion of my time in Istanbul was really just waiting for documents from England or Iran get to me in Istanbul, so that then I could then take it back to the consulate and say, here you go, this is what you wanted. And then they would say, well, come back in 2 weeks so that we can go verify. I
mean, document request to an 8-year-old child?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds, part of me, I was going to say, geez, this sounds almost traumatic, but I have a feeling you're going to point out to us how this came into play in your practice and frankly, in your success.
Yeah. A lot of people ask me, what, obviously it really had to have a major and material part in shaping who I am. I don't think I'm not a psychologist, but I think it's kind of obvious. But the beauty of the story also is, if you just tee that up as a fact hypothetical for a rational adult,
yeah,
they're going to count you out, right? And they're like, that's impossible. It's never going to happen. But the beauty of it was I was really naive, and not because I was potentially, particularly strong-willed, or I was strong-willed, but the idea of failure never really kind of, stewed or brewed in my brain. The only, I was just like, well, if I get this, I'm gonna go to the next round, and if I do that, I'm gonna get the visa, for example. I never thought about any other option, and I think that naivety created this positive energy, and I was always believing I was gonna get the visa because I was really not even aware that most people get rejected, and so I was just like being very, very positive, and it built this hustle in me that now, and I look back on it, I'm like, well, if that's possible, why can't this be possible? Whatever this may be in this particular situation.
Very, very, very interesting. Look, I've dabbled in my fair share of self-help. I've read psychology, and maybe most importantly, I was a business major at the University of Southern California. You might be saying, what does that have to do with this? At the Marshall School of Business, we took successful people and we studied them. And we broke them down and we said, what is it in their backgrounds? So it's always so interesting to me that people who have come through adversity are able to harness that adversity. In your case, you took a negative and turned it into a positive situation. And it sounds like you rode that wave. But the other thing that you said that really kind of makes my mind race is you were naive. You didn't realize how the odds were stacked against you. If a rational person saw your fact pattern, they'd say, oh, this guy's got no chance. And yet here you are sitting across from me. What would you say? Let's just say there's someone listening to this. Maybe they're down in the dumps. Maybe they're dealing with something difficult, as I'm sure a lot of people are right now in early 2021. But what would you say to those people if they happen to be listening? What would be your advice for someone who's dealing with early onset of adversity and difficulty, but nonetheless wants to push, is motivated, has strong will, as you put it?
So that's a really great question. And I talk about this very frequently, actually. When you're in a position of adversity, there's the old saying, is the glass half full or is it half empty? But I think it goes one step beyond that.
Cool.
Obviously, if you're a pessimist, the glass is half empty, which is where you are in your kind of, state of mind and you're facing some adversity. But you have to look, and again, like I have to kind of fine tune myself almost on a daily and a weekly and a monthly basis, that adversity is by the way, relative, right? And so what's adversity for you and I in our current situations is very different for someone, for a parentless orphan in Malawi.
Yeah.
But adversity is relative. Yeah. Now, whatever that relativity is, you have to either use other situations to understand how lucky we actually are. But number two, understand that adversity 99% of the times also means opportunity. Okay, so the question is, can you find the angle? Can you be creative enough with that positive energy that you're talking about to be able to turn that adversity into opportunity? Let me give you a crude example. Let's say as lawyers, and since it's a lawyer show, I'll give you a lawyer analogy. You took on a bad case and maybe you made some mistakes along the way, right? And you get hit with some sanctions. Over $10,000, over $1,000, you have to self-report to the state bar, right? Now, most people would be down in the dumps thinking, you know what, but you don't think you should have, you made some mistakes, but you don't think you should have been sanctioned in my hypothetical. Now, if you see this as a possibility, of, you know what, this is going to end my career, this is a really, really bad thing, then, you're out of the game. But you're like, well, the judge made a mistake on these issues. Maybe I have a right to appeal here and make some law on this issue, right? You then are now in the driver's seat to potentially come out with a seminal case on this area in sanctions. And then when you are the authority, and this is kind of being the not sanctions, but maybe getting seminal cases in certain areas of law, is how you get business going forward. Is because if you're the authority on any given topic, inevitably others are going to come and ask your assistance moving forward. So there is a business opportunity in that moment of diversity. If you think about it and study it, become a master of it, and then take it to the next step, you get the seminal case, then anybody else who ever gets sanctioned in that same, even a similar fact pattern is coming to you and say, will you represent me and appeal my decision, or even do the motion practice for my sanctions motion? Okay. Now that's just one little crude example of what I'm talking about. And so but that philosophy follows through in so many different ways. Whenever you think you have adversity, inevitably you have opportunity. The question is, can you figure out what the opportunity is, number one? And number two, can you execute on that opportunity?
This is incredibly inspiring, I got to say. And again, I understand it's supposed to be a lawyer show, but I was always trying to keep it open-ended. If it turns out to be something motivating, goodness gracious, lawyers need motivation as much as anyone. So there's nothing wrong with that. You said something, and I've been dying to ask you. You said I need to correct myself, or course correct, or check myself once a week, once a day, whatever it might be, to maintain sort of a perspective on what adversity you have and what you don't have, whatever it might have been. How do you do that? What is and I don't mean to pry into your life, but how do you do that?
Sure. So this started when I was really 18 years old. So I had a pretty horrendous, well, I didn't have a horrendous childhood. It was very mixed, but I had some very big traumatic events that kind of shaped my childhood from the age of 7 to 18. Okay. Which included never seeing your biological parents again, which means like 4 months of homelessness, and sleeping rough, and being hungry. I don't think most people have really experienced being hungry in the United States. Being hungry is an experience that I feel like would be an education for most people. Okay. And then when you get, as an orphan, get picked up by family, and then being accused that you only want to be adopted because you want to cheat the system, having to go to the high court, and living in a state of turmoil your entire childhood, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay. Now, when I was 18, 2 months before my 18th birthday, I eventually got adopted at the High Court in London on appeal. And my life was somewhat stabilized for the first time. And this was beginning to lead me down, because I'd been living on adrenaline for over a decade. Oh. And it caught up with me, and I went into a state of depression. I just started feeling really upset and kind of self-sorrow. For the first time, I had time on my hands to feel sorry for myself, because I didn't actually have to deal with the problem. And I'm not a therapist. I didn't go to a therapist, but I self-diagnosed that I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was going down a slippery slope. So I took a year out between high school and university. I worked for 4 or 5 months, and I went to Africa for a year. Because I thought I needed to give myself some perspective. Okay. And I went to the second poorest country in 1997, which was Malawi, living in a hut, no electricity, no running water, teaching underprivileged kids, where literally the norm at the school was, and when I say school, it was like a shack, right? It was like the norm with people coming in every day saying, I'm sick, signing out sick because I had malaria, or they'd been bitten by a snake. That was your norm, for the morning, right? Where people are living on 1 meal a day on just pure starch, no meat, no protein. And it was just a really, really terrible state of affairs. And even I myself got malaria in that time when I was living there. Yeah. But the difference was, even though I had, insurance and I could be air vac'd out, I wanted to stay the full term, because I still had a light at the end of that tunnel, and that light was going back to England, right? These poor people had nowhere to go. That was their day in, day out for perpetuity, right? And I felt like, even though I'd been through these crazy experiences as a child, I went to Africa as a boy, and I came back as a man. That really changed my perspective in life. And it kind of reminded me that when you're in a place of comfort, where you're in a place of privilege, where you're in a place of power, it's very easy to forget yourself and think that you've got a hard life and hard problems, when you really don't. And that's what I'm saying. I get upset with my employees, or I get upset about a certain judge ruling a certain way for me, or I get upset about kind of things that I shouldn't be getting upset about. I have no room to be upset about those things, considering the amount of luck that I've had in my life and what others are going through at this particular time. And I remind myself of two things. Number one, you could be over there going through that right now. And also, this is not a problem. This is an opportunity. So you keep having to check yourself daily, weekly, monthly, annually. Check yourself, because 99% of the people that you and I are in circles with in America are in a place of privilege. We are privileged. We have a JD and a license to practice law. That's a privilege. We are living in the United States. That's a privilege. We are sitting in our nice offices, in front of our nice computers, going home to our nice houses. Those are all privileges. And we forget how privileged we are. That's what I mean by you got to check yourself daily, weekly, monthly, annually.
I don't mean to pry too much, but is there a tool that you use? I know a lot of athletes do visualizations. Some people just express gratitude for 1 or 2, 3 things a day. Is there a tool that you use to facilitate this? Because I talk to a lot of attorneys. I'm very happy to do what I'm doing. And goodness gracious, you're right. It is sincerely a privilege. And I'm so lucky and so fortunate. But we also talk to so many attorneys who hate it, and they hate their lives and they're miserable. Is there an intellectual tool that you've used to do this? Or do you just say, hey, it's not like what it used to be. I should appreciate what I have?
I think life is 90% psychology, 90% psychology. Like I love to work out, right? Like I love to work out, and I love kind of getting to the point of where it's hurting. I want to puke, but I want to do it more, right? And the thing is like my partner, Mike, who I have the law firm with, all kinds of people that are like, kind of, what's wrong with you? And I like, if you don't feel good, why do you work out? I'm like, because those are the days that matter. And I think it has a lot to do with my boarding school upbringing as well, because I went to boarding school, and they would make you do cross country, like run, like whether it was sunny, raining, hailing, snowing. The only time cross country would ever get canceled is one time, and there was a hurricane for the first time in 50 years in England. Outside of that, we were doing cross country. And if you tried to say I'm sick, they would put you in the sanatorium for a week on bread and water. Right. So the lesser of evil, the 2 evils, was running. So if you're going to do run, you might as well do it right, because otherwise you'd be cold. Right. And so the mentality is like, how am I going to get around this course quicker? Because then it's going to be finished. And so I've always been the kind of, like, to using a childhood analogy, I never would like to eat food before I did my homework. Right. I always wanted to do the hard thing first to get rewarded with the good thing. Right. And I believe so to answer your question, it's just like, I take enjoyment. I try, I don't always succeed, right? But what I try to do is make everything that I do enjoyable. You have to have this positive mindset. It's like, if I can do this, and I don't know what my prize is going to be, whether it's to lose weight, whether it's to earn that dessert that you want to do in working out, or if I write this motion, or I mark up this motion, I really pride myself in a number of published opinions I have. I have close to over 800 published opinions. And so I'm like, yeah, this is going to be a seminal case because I'm a nerd and I love doing that. Everything to me is a challenge, and there's a cost and a prize attached to it. And it's all psychological. So if I'm finding myself challenged by something, I'm like, what's the reward? What's the challenge and what's the reward? And so and I'm not competing with other people necessarily. Like I do Peloton religiously, and I'm always trying to beat my best. I'm psychotic, and to the point where I vomited, right? But that's my mindset, because I find that satisfying. And it's hard to explain that, but you have to find enjoyment in what you do. And something that you said that's interesting is, I talk to a lot of lawyers and they don't like what they're doing. But don't do it, right? Why kill yourself doing something that you're miserable at? Find passion in what you're doing. I love my job. I love my job. And I think, when I speak to kids, especially I do a lot of Zooms because schools read my books and stuff. And I was like, it doesn't matter what it is that you want to do. Find a passion for what it is. And if you're passionate about something, you're going to be the best at it, because it's so much easier to be the best at something if you're passionate about it. If you're not passionate about it, forget it. You're going to be mediocre at best. Because you don't find anyone that's a champion at anything that is not passionate about it. Roger Federer is passionate about tennis, right? The reason why he is the GOAT is because he lives and breathes it. Tom Brady, exactly the same. And you look at the top trial lawyers, they love they love being in the courtroom. It doesn't matter what it is, whether you like whatever you want to be, you have to be passionate about it. Otherwise, I think it's almost impossible to be the best at it.
Oh, very, very interesting. I remember from what I learned at the Marshall School of Business, my business classes where we studied successful people. One thing that I took away from that, and frankly, you have reminded me of it, and I don't say this in any negative way, but a lot of these people who we studied were extreme. They were extreme in how they went about things. When everyone else was sleeping, they were reading about this thing. While everyone else was doing X, Y, and Z, they were focused on that thing. And that's how you become, the guy from Virgin Atlantic, or that's how you become the CEO of Microsoft or Apple or whatever it might be. And I'm hearing that in speaking with you, and I know we've mostly discussed it in terms of outside of the law, but you're telling me that you like to exercise to the point where it hurts. That has to be a significant competitive advantage for your law firm going up against other lawyers, I would assume.
Yeah, I think exercise has so many different benefits because we're in a very stressful occupation and we need some kind of release. Exercise is my release, right? I think, I was brought up to believe, healthy body, healthy mind, you need to have that balance. And the thing is and it gives you that competitive edge, like you said, to be that, I think it's very important to be pragmatic as a lawyer, but it's also important to know that when you shouldn't let go, that they know that you're in it for the long haul. Right? You're not going to bully me out of this situation. If you're going to win, you're going to have to earn that win. I don't mind losing, but you're going to have to earn it. If you're my opposite counsel. And, if I have to appeal, I'll appeal. I mean, I've argued in front of the Ninth Circuit like 10 odd times, state appeals courts, whatever. I will appeal it if I think I'm going to win. And if there's a matter of, right and wrong, I'm going to go the distance. And I don't think that's any different in exercising, or whether it's in the field of law or just in life. Life is a big competition, right? Well, whatever we're in. And so I think it absolutely translates over 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very, frankly, very motivating. Why don't we've not talked about law for 30 minutes. I don't know what your schedule is like. If you have another 20, 30 minutes, I'm happy to go.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Why don't we actually talk about law? So what happened at I know it's not Starbucks. You said it was a different coffee shop.
That was best, yeah.
What is this? Everyone's telling me about this?
So, I graduated and I passed the bar, and I was waiting for my nephew to finish Chapman at the same time, Mike. And I was kind of doing project work till he came out. But by the time he came out, I literally had $200 left. We were 6 months apart, right? I had $200 left, and I had a Boost mobile telephone and a broken laptop from law school. We couldn't even afford like a crappy office. We just paid like the $15 for a postal address, and then we were working out of Seattle's Best. And that's where our law firm honestly started. Our letter had my Boost mobile telephone number on it. That was our number. And I was advertising on Craigslist. I was doing literally just hustling, just trying to and there was only one thing I knew when we started this. Well, I knew two things. One thing was I didn't want to work for anybody else. And the other thing that I knew was that I wanted to have a specialty. I didn't know what it was, but I wanted one, right? Because I knew that in order to be successful in our area, at least from my perspective, you needed to be the best at something, or one of the best at something. And so, but at the beginning, we were just on Craigslist doing domestic violence, DUIs, divorces, pretty much anything that would come through the door to pay the bills, right? And during this, I wish we'd been recorded or something. It would have been a great story. There was this girl called Molly that was a barista. I would the phone would go, I would throw it to her. She would pick up and say, Kazerounian Law Group, how can I help you? And then she would let me see if he's available, Mr. Such and Such, and then hand it back to me. And I'm hello, this is Abbas, how can I help you? Then the blender would go in the background, and then the guy would be what is that noise? I'm oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the shredder room right now. Let me just leave. And then I would go outside. I mean, all kinds of nonsense, right? It was just early days hustle. And again, as crappy a situation that was, is that I would get off on that. Like, again, like talking about your, the mental state is to create something that's a negative into a positive, right? It's a good story to tell when you're with your friends, and it's basically inspires you to like make something happen. And anyway, one day this guy comes in and goes, I heard you guys are like lawyers are working out of Seattle's Best. I'm like, yeah. He goes, I got sued by Capital One. And I was like, how much is the debt? And he's like, $3,500. And he's like, well, all the lawyers want like $250, $350 an hour. If I could pay them, I'd pay the credit card. I said, I tell you what, give me $500 flat fee. If it goes to trial, it goes to trial. I'll do the whole thing flat. And he was like, done. So he gives me $500, which I thought would result, and then I, write the answer, write the discovery, send it out. And 2 weeks later, the guy calls me and he goes, hey, are they meant to still be calling me? Like, aren't you representing me now? Because it's kind of getting embarrassing. And I'm like, I go to the law library because I didn't have Westlaw and Lexis. I find this thing called the Rosenthal Act, which is premised on which is the sister statute of a federal statute called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And I'm like, no, man, I think we got a lawsuit. So I file a counter complaint against these guys and sue them under the Rosenthal Act. Lo and behold, fast forward like 60 days. That's all it took. The guy's debt goes away. He gets $1,000 in his pocket, and we ended up with like $6,000, $7,000 for literally like not doing a lot. And I'm like, I love this. I get to, and honestly, at this time, this is before the inception of the CFPB. A lot of Mickey Mouse debt collectors out there. I started suing debt collectors under the Rosenthal Act and predominantly the FDCPA. And because you've got federal jurisdiction, most of my cases were getting transferred into federal court. So I had a very steep learning curve and became a federal practitioner very, very, very quickly. And the beauty about federal court is and the thing is at the beginning, when they don't know who you are, they're bringing motions left, right, and center. And once you get rulings on these motions, most of them are published. So like within 2 years, I had like 15, 20 decisions on kind of unique fact patterns. I'm getting calls from Nebraska, Arkansas, New York, Florida. Hey, do you want to co-counsel this? It's a very similar fact pattern to yours. Next thing I know, I'm just like becoming a specialist at the FDCPA and the Rosenthal Act in this very, very tiny area of law, like where we sue debt collectors, and the judges don't know much about this. And I'm going into court and they're like, counsel, let me get this straight. You owe them, your client owes them money and you're suing them. And you're like, yeah, damn right. And like trying to educate the jurists in our jurisdiction about the FDCPA to the point now where I'm in court on these kind of issues, the judges, like if it's a 50-50 call, they give me a lot of deference. Like I know it's probably going to go my way. Now that then we're moving into our own offices now, but we're still pretty small time. Hitting for $100,000 is like a big deal for us at this point still. Then because of these debt collection calls, people started getting automated telephone calls, and I started like educating myself. And like 2008, I'm only a year and a half into being a lawyer. The ACA, which is the Organization for All Debt Collectors, has their national convention in San Diego. We sneak in and get into a closed door meeting, right? And because nobody knows who we are, right? So like we're in a closed door meeting at the ACA, and they're talking about the statute called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act and how it's like the spawn of the devil and it's going to kill debt collection industry and the banking industry and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, woo. So like I go back and I like sift through my clients and I go find this old guy like who used to be a class, because if you start doing class actions, you can't immediately do class actions, right? You need to be certified previously to be experienced counsel in a class action format. And I'd never done a class action. So I found a guy who was a class action practitioner, and he agreed to co-counsel these with me, even though he had no idea what the TCPA was. And he was like, yeah, like, until you get enough experience, I'll be on the pleadings with you guys. So I filed against Sallie Mae, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, like 3 different lines against Bank of America, 3 different lines against Wells Fargo, 3 different lines against Chase, HSBC. I mean, I tripled down on this theory. Well, within 2 years, Sallie Mae settled for $25 million. Chase 1, Chase 2, Chase 3 within 3 years settled for like over 40 million. Bank of America settled for like over 45 million. HSBC for 49 million. Like literally boom, 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 like this. And then suddenly everyone was like, who is this kid? Right? And literally, I remember this, like at that time, we were like also getting like crappy cases from PI like mills, and we were just trying anything we could get our hands on just to like earn a living. And they were telling me I'm chasing rainbows with this like thing with the class action work. And then that kind of developed itself over time into me just being what I would like to be deemed as like a fair to do class action practitioner, where we're bringing cases under RESPA, TILA, FCRA. We're doing a ton of FICRA work. And then like, mislabeling class actions. Like right now we have like a biochemist that's in-house for us that helps us with like, with those kind of class actions. And it's kind of developed where we now have a law firm of like 23 to 25 lawyers, a work staff of almost 50, in a space of just under, like, we started in November of 2007. So that would be like 13 and a half years. That's where we went from there to here. And so that's kind of the journey in kind of giving you the cliff notes. That's how we got there.
I mean, it's one hell of a journey. That's for sure. From an 8-year-old child who leaves Iran on his own to hitting 40 million, 25 million. So I know all the lawyers at home are going to be wondering on these class actions, is it just the volume of the individuals who you're representing as a class was so massive that it enabled these Goliath settlements? Or is there an issue of like attorney fees? And I don't mean to dip into your special sauce, but just so that generally speaking, the attorneys at home know what's up. These are consumer class actions based on debt collection.
Well, some yes, some no. Like the TCPA, it's based upon unwanted robocalls. Like, it's either a pre-recorded voice where it's like a robot or somebody who records a voice and they send them en masse, or they use what's called a automatic telephone dialing system. It's usually you hear a click when you pick up the phone, or there's a pause before the agent talks to you. Generally, they're marketing calls or they're collection calls. Now, what's beautiful about the TCPA is that it permits $500 for negligent violation, statutory damages, and $1,500 for willful. So, and it's stacked damages. Okay? And so, like, if you have a class of 1 million people that even got one call, you're talking about $500 million in potential liability just for negligent calls. I mean, this is a statute that has a lot of teeth. It doesn't have attorney's fees attached to the TCPA, unlike a lot of other remedial consumer statutes. But under the common fund doctrine in the class action, so like if you settle a case for $1 million, you're entitled in the Ninth Circuit, the benchmark is about 25%. With a little leeway under or over, depending on how little or how much work you've done. Sometimes you can get up to 30%. But obviously, like, if you get $20 million, you're entitled to 25% as long as you can satisfy the lodestar cross-check under Ninth Circuit stare decisis. So that's the way it works. Whereas other statutes, let's say the FDCPA, they have attorney's fees provision. So you can get your fees under the common fund doctrine, which is like a percentage of the fund, or you get relief for the class for their damages, and then you do a fee petition for your attorney's fees and maybe ask for a multiplier if you've done exceptional work under the attorney's fees provision. And the same is true, for example, under FICRA, under the CLRA, and a bunch of different kind of remedial statutes exist out there.
You didn't know that you would be stumbling into this area of law and frankly becoming known and very successful. You didn't know. It just so happens someone came to you with credit card debt and one thing led to another.
Right. I mean, like I didn't. I mean, like I think it takes a little bit of imagination, a little bit of tenacity, a little bit of just good old lawyering to be able to, again, make a problem an opportunity, right? So like, for a lot of people, that would have just been a $500 deal and, whatever. The guy comes with you with a problem and I didn't know the answer. I'm like, oh God, like, I hope he doesn't want his $500 back. That was because like the reason he came to me is because he didn't want to be hounded, right? And I said I would represent him. But then I went and did some like research and I was like, no, this is an opportunity. We get to sue them. Let's go sue them. And we did. And look what turned out. But then you don't stop there though, right? Like when you like, I love sports analogies. Just because you win that point, you don't stop. You want to destroy them. Like while you got them down, you finish it, right? Like, and so it's the same thing. You find the law. Now, what are you going to do with that law, right? We're going in the middle of the biggest recession since the Great Depression in 2008, right? I'm like, I don't even need to do marketing. Everybody I know is in debt, is probably getting telephone calls, all right? Use what you just found. Like you're sitting in it, like literally on top of a treasure chest. All you got to do is dig it up, right? And a lot of people just don't go through the motions of digging it up, to use that analogy. So once you like come across something, you have to use your imagination a little bit and see where the opportunities are.
See, the reason I asked you what I just asked you was not to take anything away from what you've accomplished. I asked you because what's harkening back again to my study of successful people, the one thing they all had in common was they were hungry. They were hungry. And what I'm hearing here is yet another example of that. You were hungry, you were willing, you had the perseverance and tenacity and willpower and drive. And someone happens to come up to you at the coffee shop and say, I got a debt, and you were ready to go. And you grabbed a little bit of rope and you pulled it till you had a whole stack of it, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, people are like, well, how do I know, what to look for in a class action? I'm like, literally, you're walking midst a million different class actions every day. If you want to be educated on what to look for, come and sit with me and I will give my time to you and teach you what to look for. But you have to use your imagination a little bit and see, like, what I just witnessed, is that an opportunity right there? Is the consumer being defrauded in some way? Are there any of their rights being violated? Can you help vindicate their rights in this particular situation? And you need you need to be creative. I think some of the best lawyers in a country are the most creative. Like, you need a certain amount of skill, no question. You need your fundamental theory that you learn in law school. You need, your writing skills, your advocacy, oral advocacy skills, all of that. But that only gets you to a certain point. If you want to overcome that sort of line of mediocrity, in my opinion, and it is subjective, of course, it's just my opinion, you have to be creative. You have to be on the lookout and manipulate and massage the law within the parameters of the law, of course, but massage it. And a lot of, almost, I would say 80% of what I do is gray area. There's literally, every case brings about a certain issue or issues of first impression. And like I said, I'm passionate about being a lawmaker. I love carving the law out. You have to choose the issue in front of the right judge, in the right jurisdiction, at the right time, with the right client. If it's not, get out. Like, you know what? Get the best you can for your client. Wait, be patient. Wait for the next one. But you have to know which issue to push at what time, and then you're going to be the creator of that law, which is great for you, great for your accolades for your firm, and it gives you future potential business opportunity.
When you were doing these things, though, you didn't think it would be a future potential business opportunity. You were just pulling on that rope as hard as you could, it sounds like.
Yes, but then once I started getting the calls just on those individual cases, the light bulb went off, and I'm like, like, the only thing I told you at the beginning I knew was I want to be a specialist at something. I didn't even know. I just wanted to know, I love that area and I want to be a specialist at it, right? And so I found it, I loved it, and I went with it. Then another opportunity arose. I got a call from Nebraska. I'm like, yes, like, that's what I want to do. And so I'm like, now I see like the nexus between being the authority and the business opportunity. And once I link the two, there was no stopping me. But you have to also be like, careful that you don't destroy the law in your zealous nature in trying to create more business opportunity, because you don't want to push issues too hard. And, I always say about the law is that you want to take nibbles. You don't want to take a big bite. It's very easy for a judge to say no to you when you're greedy, right? But if you're just taking a little nibble in your favor, it's much easier for a judge to say yes.
Interesting. Right? Okay. You had said, your website said 650 published opinions, but you said 800.
Yeah, that's about 3-4 years old, I think.
Okay. 800 published opinions. Tell me about that.
I mean, I'm in federal court. Like, I mean, right now we have over 3,000 cases in litigation. Not all in the federal court, but like,
Wow.
A lot of them, I would say about 70-80% are. Ton of motion practice in my law firm, and I mean, when you're racking up that kind of motion practice, it's not hard to, and most of what we do in federal court draws a lot of motion practice. And when you're drawing that many motions in a week or a month or in a year, you're going to rack up some published opinions pretty quickly. I mean, just go to Lexis or Westlaw, just type in my name in the natural term search, and you're going to get pages of it. Like, I mean, that includes losses too. Don't get me wrong, but they're still published, right? With my association to them. But I'm very happy to tell you that I've won more than I've lost. So like that's always handy.
I know there's a particular one on your website. Is it Knutson versus Sirius XM, or is it Knutson? I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
You know, it depends who you ask, but the client the client says Knutson. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's probably one of like that at the time was it's a seminal arbitration case actually in the Ninth Circuit that I won. And but then there's another case that I would argue is more important than Knutson that I argued, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But Knutson is a seminal case because if you were in the kind of, I mean, it doesn't matter, even if you do PI for your bread and butter, you're going to come across arbitration issues. But in the consumer world, you're going to come across them even more frequently. And I think in 2011 it was that the U.S. Supreme Court on a Scalia decision came out with the AT&T Concepcion case. And the Concepcion case, essentially, like it was against AT&T, and it was their arbitration clause in their contract that really Scalia went through in extreme detail and explained why it was because it was a conscionability issue that came from the Ninth Circuit. It actually came from the Southern District of California and before Judge Sabra that made its way to the United States Supreme Court. And Scalia went through and said, this is conscionable because, this is conscionable because. But the very first paragraph, and when Concepcion came out, by the way, everyone thought it was all doom and gloom and class actions as we know it were over. But in order for him to have come to that conclusion, he left a lot of nuggets around there and some opportunities. And, you know, he started off with the normal contractual defenses still exist. You know, in order for, we have to give massive deference to the FAA. You know, it preempts the Discover rule in California. And these are why the AT&T, this is what all the reasons why the AT&T contract is conscionable. So what he did was he blessed and gave the blueprint to corporate America on how to draft their contracts moving forward. And so what I was seeing a lot of subsequent to that were people still attacking arbitration under unconscionability, which in California had a lot of traction pre-Concepcion. But unconscionability, though it still exists as a defense, it's almost impossible. If anyone comes close to the AT&T contract, you know that it's been blessed by the US Supreme Court. You're not going to get much traction there. So you have to go to other contractual defenses. And there is no better contractual defense than lack of formation, offer, acceptance, and consideration, law school 101, first year, right? And that's what that case was about. And so like, it was almost like, hey, I went to a fourth year law school. Maybe these guys are super smart that went to Harvard. I went to the Harvard of the West. But, what I was taught at law school is offer, acceptance, consideration. Maybe I'm wrong. And they're like, no, you're absolutely right. Like, and, they've got these appellate specialists at these big, it was Minette Phelps that argued that. They have special appellate counsel that came in. I wrote the brief myself. I argued it myself, and I won 3-0. It's it's not because I'm better writer than these guys, but I just knew how to attack it using the case law that went against me.
How long does that take to prepare a motion like that and to argue it? Like, how many man hours did you put into that?
Well, I mean, that was my first Ninth Circuit appellate argument. So that probably your first time is always the longest. But it was such an important case as well, which ultimately that Sirius XM case went on to sell for $35 million because of that case. Because they had won at that point, right? So we took it back, and then ultimately it got consolidated into other cases in the Eastern District of Virginia. But to answer your question, It depends on the issue, on how discrete an issue it is, how many ancillary issues there are, and how many issues is the court, are we appealing before the Ninth Circuit or the appellate court, right? And then it's just editing, because I think a lot of people forget you're at Ninth Circuit, you're one step away from the US Supreme Court, just one step away, and you're really on show about how good a writer you are, how good an oral advocate you are. And I take that super seriously. And I've seen people come to the Ninth Circuit very ill prepared and they look like clowns, but then you see the really good lawyers showing up and they can tell you, they get asked a question and they're like, Your Honor, that was docket 50/5. If you go to line 20, like they've just got it, And so I have this methodology myself where, so that the writing of the brief will probably go through, 8 to 10 drafts before we're happy with it. And I work usually with 2 associates on them. And it's just a very collaborative effort. We work on different portions and we edit each other's portions. Then once that's submitted, then I have my paralegals make me binders of like cases from the very, very important to the medium important to the, very little. And I make a point of reading every single case. And when I read every single case, I create a chart of essentially what the case stands for, the big issues. And if there's a big quote I want to use potentially in oral argument, I stick that in my chart. And then I close my office down. When I say my office, like I go dark for a week. And then I bring the appellate team in and we go through every conceivable variant argument that is going to be thrown at you by the panel. Like in that week, and just go over it over. And then like you start off with an outline as if they're going to let you speak for 10 or 15 minutes, depending on how long they're giving you without any questions. But inevitably you barely get your name out and they're all over you. Right. And so and then we go like, we perfect the outline as if I'm not going to be interrupted. Then once that's done, we go to the next stage, which is then we start again, and then we start firing questions like at whoever is doing the oral argument. And we just start training and until like, the night before, like, even though it's usually in Pasadena, sometimes it's in San Francisco. Well, I had one in Alaska, which actually ended up going virtual because of the pandemic. But like, even if it's in Pasadena, I don't leave anything to chance. I stay at the hotel right next to even though I'm in Orange County, right? I have my ritual. I go to Pasadena, I stay the night. I always eat at I think it's called Alexander Steakhouse right next to the courthouse. Like it's a whole ritual, like, and that's the way we do it. So, I mean, it's literally hundreds of hours, man. Like, I mean, I can't give you a specific number because it's going to vary from case to case, but it's hundreds of hours.
I mean, it sounds like you're preparing for a presidential debate.
I think you have to. Again, you're on the show to the country. Like you're the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which to me is a big deal.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think sometimes a lot of attorneys I speak to forget, circling back to how we started this, the privilege that we have, the ability that we have. I'm always shocked that the ability I have to ruin someone's life by filing a lawsuit. I don't go around trying to ruin people's life, I promise, but it is at my fingertips as an attorney. There's a lot of power, and you have not allowed yourself to be jaded to that. You have not allowed yourself to take that for granted. And it shows in the sense that you're saying, hey, the Ninth Circuit is a smidge before the biggest court of the land. You got to show up proper, and you're getting a hotel room the night before, et cetera, et cetera. It's obvious, you see people who make big money and everyone's jealous and everyone hears or they're happy for them. I shouldn't say they're jealous. Some people are jealous. Some people are happy. Some people are naysayers. Some people are positive. And you see all the accolades and you see the champagne bottles being popped and the interviews or the podcast or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Behind all that is just snub-nosed, brute-forced, as you put it, strong-willed labor. And in your case in particular, it seems to have been very fruitful. So I'm very happy for you, sir. It certainly sounds like if there's someone who's deserved all this, it certainly sounds like it's you, my friend.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, I think a lot of people like get into it for the money, and it would be disingenuous to say that money is not good. Like everybody likes money. At least I think they do. But that is not what drives me. Money drives me. It motivates me, but it's not my primary motivation. Like, I just want to be the best, and I want to do the best for my client. And I know that an ancillary effect of that is that if you're successful in that goal, the money is also coming with it, right? But you can't let the money, at least from my perspective. And again, everybody has a different perspective. And I'm not trying to say I don't work for money. I work for money, right? But like, that's not the driving force. It's representing the client and being the best at what you do is the driving force, with full awareness that money accompanies that success if you manage to achieve that initial goal.
Wow. Okay. I mean, this has been an enlightening episode. Frankly, very motivating too, sir. You're very. Have you ever done any motivational speaking?
Not really. No. Like, I've been asked a couple of times, but it's not something that I do frequently. No.
I mean, you have the story. You have the ability to present the story. I'm motivated. I have a feeling I'm going to weigh less on the scale tomorrow morning than I do today because I'm listening to you, and it's inspiring. It's like, you can always do better, and there's people out there who show you that you can do better. And I'll be honest with you, I hope this is not the only time that you and I speak. I hope we can sit down at some point when the world's maybe a little bit more calm. I have all sorts of other social media apparatuses where I'm having people interact with lawyers, and you in particular, not everyone wants to sit down and hear, it's code section 45569.83. And there's a time for that. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes people just want to feel and hear someone else's success. And in addition to the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars that your office is producing, you're incredibly inspirational in that sense. So as I always say, I'm the luckiest guy because I just get to sit here and ask the questions. If I'm curious, I put it out there and you answered it. So I'm completely in your debt, my friend. I sincerely appreciate your time. And I hope this is not the only time we have an opportunity to interact.
No, I mean, I want to thank you for even considering me, having me on the show. And I want to tell you, you probably can see I have a podcast little studio right behind me myself. I have my own little podcast show.
I see it.
And what I want to tell you is that you're amazingly good at your job. Like you're really, really good at listening and asking the right questions and letting someone like me babble on. And so what you do is actually not that easy, and you're very, very good at it.
That's kind of you. I appreciate that. The check's in the mail. I'll make sure we get it covered for that. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. Why don't you just take a moment? Not that you need me to plug your podcast, but what is your podcast about?
It's not really aimed at lawyers. It's aimed at individual, like consumers. It's called Know Your Rights, the Consumer Lawcast. And so, we try to put out like an episode a month usually, and it's about different areas of consumer rights, whether it's mortgage fraud, whether it's, we did a landlord-tenant one during COVID, debt collectors bothering you, again, COVID related because we've been going through COVID, anything like bankruptcy, anything that falls within the gamut of consumer law, we cover, and it's targeted at, Mr. Smith on Main Street. That's the target audience.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm definitely going to check it out. I have perused your podcast in the past. I'm going to check it out again now, of course. All right, sir. We made it an hour. It feels like 25 minutes to me. I think that's a good sign.
I hope so. Well, thank you again for having me, and send me a link when it's up. So I'd love to.
Absolutely. Sincerely, I know you're a busy guy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Bye-bye.